Part 36. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Enchenmi San. Chapter 365. Kaylan leaned down, came closer, and gently bit Zophia's lower lip. Zophia's lip gloss had a unique fragrance of roses, and this smell immediately filled Ian's entire nasal cavity. Vaguely, he seemed to be able to taste a less obvious sweetness. Although Ian's movements were very jerky, they were full of aggression. His arms tightly hugged Zophia's shoulders and pressed tightly against her body, as if he wanted to rub her into his chest. Average. Zophia did not dodge, but responded actively. She leaned against the wall of the corridor, stood on tiptoes, and stretched her legs straight. After more than a full minute, their lips parted. Zophia gasped a little quickly, and her face was flushed. She didn't know whether it was due to lack of oxygen or emotion, or whether it was due to lack of oxygen or emotion. Yes, it's both. There are surveillance cameras in the corridor, she said softly to Kaylan. Okay, Kaylan let go of her. That's enough. Zophia looked at Kaylan with some surprise. Not only her, but also Hound and the others who were hiding in the corner of the corridor and peeking at the situation in the corridor with a small mirror also looked confused. This was obviously a mistake. You have already stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. Why did you brake suddenly again? Hey, let me tell you, Kaylan really has something wrong with his body, right? Hound said to Yvonne worriedly. This won't work. Doctor, why don't you check on him someday? I already had a full body checkup last time, Yvonne muttered in a low voice. He is in good health and has no hidden diseases. That's really weird. You can actually bear this. The corners of Hound's mouth twitched slightly. Doesn't he like men? As for that, we've already kissed you. It's much better than before, Layton interjected. It lasted more than a minute. It's true that the Emperor is not in a hurry and the eunuch is in a hurry. The eldest lady has already taken such initiative, but this guy just doesn't understand. He's so damn unsatisfied. He's gone. He might as well go play poker for a while. If I read on, sooner or later I'll have a myocardial infarction from this guy's anger. With such a vicious murder incident, it was almost impossible for the finals to continue. Fortunately, the Yip Group's crisis public relations capabilities were quite good. They held 3 press conferences in a row, proactively admitted their mistakes, and promised to provide substantial compensation to all spectators and participating teams, and make up the game after 3 months. On the other hand, hired trolls broke the scandal of the Addams family, quietly pointing the spotlight of public opinion at Man and the Addams family behind Man, thereby diverting people's emotional vent. As for how the Addams family will respond, that is not something that the Yet family group needs to be concerned about. As for Chi Hanfan, under the mediation of General Maginot, he was sentenced to indignation murder. In addition, there were certain circumstances of surrender, and the sentence was finally set to 8 years. Fortunately, Chi Hanfan's identity at this time was civilians rather than soldiers, otherwise, they would be tried by a military court, and the sentence would be at least 15 years. The prison where Chi Hanfan is imprisoned is the 3rd prison of the West 4th District under the control of the Security Bureau. This is the best prison among the prisons on Ark. Moreover, it is not under the jurisdiction of the military, and the Addams family has no control over it. Fa Zhen came to the 3rd prison. Valentina was assigned to the Medical Research Institute under the Mitsui Consortium. Although Sakurai Na has joined the Hunting God hunting group, she also said that she alone cannot cure Valentina. Na's old injury must be assisted by a large number of medical equipment, coupled with expensive new drugs, to make it possible to heal. Kaylan and others returned to Ark the day after the suspension. Although there was no mission to explore the ruins, they still had another thing to do, go to the Southern District 16 to find Marshall, who had been missing for many years. After repeated discussions, the final team lineup was Kaylan, Akira Asano, Yvonne and the tool man Layton. Ivan also wanted to try to find out about the doctor who disappeared in the sick village 4 years ago. At the same time, he also had a strong interest in the radiation sickness patients living in the sick village. After all, in addition to the sick village, it is difficult to find another place where so many living samples have been gathered. Moreover, it is said that ghoulies have appeared in the sick village, which makes Ivan even more excited. As for Leighton, he still carries the title of Tool Man this time, and he himself said that he has become accustomed to it. Anyway, he is idle at the hunting group headquarters. During this time, he has seen a lot of all kinds of things. The mecha instead made him enter a period of burnout. Following Kaylan and the others to the space station to find people was a change of taste. After learning the news, Sakurai Na wanted to come, but Kaylan refused without hesitation and threatened, "If you come, I will tell Asano Akira about your crush on Asano Akira," directly blocking the girl who wanted to continue to pester her back. Until this moment, Sakurina had no idea that Kaylan had already betrayed herself. Speaking of which, you don't know if you don't check. If you check, you'll be really shocked, but this place always gives me a very weird feeling. Hound rested his hands on the long table in the conference room. Frowning, he looked at the information displayed on the projection screen. The entire space station is divided into 3 floors, and the total area is even larger than an area on the Ark. Ivan clutched his precious wine bottle and leaned on the sofa. Although those mining companies once sent people to move the entire space station, they have been repaired and expanded, but this was nearly 30 years ago. After that, apart from sending radiation sickness patients and living supplies, they never sent anyone to the space station again. Staff A, B, C, D, E, and F are 6 areas in total. Except for Area A, where the Space Station Control Center is located, only areas B and C are inhabited. The other 3 areas are in disrepair, and even the most basic, the lighting system and life support system, are not functioning properly. No one knows what will be in those 3 areas. Weightlessness and darkness are okay, but lack of oxygen, water shortage, low temperature, it is absolutely impossible for normal creatures to survive in the other 3 zones. Ivan said slowly. Those who can survive must not be normal creatures, Kaylan added. What I'm most worried about now is, what if the person we are looking for is not in Area B or Area C? To be honest, these places make me feel very uncomfortable. Leighton pointed to the space station design drawing. Areas D, E, and F marked in red said, the information on this design map was retained before the space station was expanded. As for what the space has become now, few people on the Ark know. It was like an isolated island abandoned by the world, isolated from the world. Except for the poor people who were sent to the island to wait for death, no one knew what the entire island looked like. The expansion project of that year did not leave much reliable information. In order to save costs, the so-called expansion was actually the simplest and crudest way of removing partition walls and adding external cabins. There were no drawings or information related to the expansion project. The files were uploaded to the database, and the construction teams involved in the project at that time were basically outsourced. Now, it is probably more difficult to find these people than to find Marshall in the sick village. That's like finding a needle in a haystack. Hound said with emotion. P.S. Thank you to World Watcher for the 500 starting coins, and to Book Friends 201908120859488831 and Yunli Wooly QWQ for the 100 starting coins. PPS driving? It doesn't exist. Yesterday's chapter was just about cuddling and cuddling. I hope today's kiss scene can survive. If you really have to drive and wait for me, if you have free time, maybe you can write some extras in the group. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Enchenmi-san. Chapter 366. In the past 20 years, no one has tried to explore the space station. Kaylan pressed the remote control, and the information on the projection screen suddenly turned to the next page. There is information to follow. It was recorded 4 times in total, 9 years ago, 6 years ago, 4 years ago and 3 years ago. The latest record is of little value. It was a group of rich young men who held some kind of valor test meeting. As a result, they only circled around the periphery of areas B and C, and did not even go deep into areas B and C. He returned to the Ark in despair. The entire file including the title is less than 200 words. As for the time 4 years ago, it should be the time when Ivan's friend disappeared, Kaylan said. Well, there were 3 people in total, all doctors. The purpose of the exploratory operation was to study topics related to radiation sickness, but when they came back, only 2 people were left, and both of them died within a year. The cause of death was highly malignant. Of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, Ivan said. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, Kaylan was slightly startled. This is a malignant tumor of the blood system. Compared with leukemia, which is also a malignant tumor of the blood system, the 5-year survival rate of non-Hodgkin lymphoma is slightly lower. It is higher, but the death rate of highly malignant lymphoma is much faster than that of acute leukemia. The shortest time from the onset of obvious symptoms to death is only a few days. In this case, there is not even a window for rescue. With current medical technology, many cancers are no longer terminal diseases. Even if they cannot be completely cured, it is still easy to extend the patient's survival time and improve the quality of life. And these 2 people themselves are doctors, and they are not the kind of people whose family background is difficult and cannot afford medical expenses. However, they died of lymphoma attacks within a year. Obviously, they suffered from that kind of malignancy. The highest and fastest type of death. Is it because they were exposed to radiation? Kaylan asked. The description of the 2 people's illnesses in the document was vague. On the contrary, Ivan knew more. Even if they didn't wear protective clothing, going to a place like that you must be taking anti-radiation drugs, right? After you come back, you will definitely be instilling anti-radiation drugs to remove the radiation from your body. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be the case. If the radiation is that strong, then there was no way anyone could survive. Look at this one. Ivan pointed to a paragraph in the information and said, they were attacked by unknown people when they were visiting patients with radiation sickness in the sick village. Ivan paused and continued, one of these 2 people had contact with me after returning to the Ark. He told me that after the attacker wounded them, he spilled his own blood on their wounds. You mean, blood infection? Kaylan pondered for a few seconds, but, although non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a malignant tumor of the blood system, this disease will not be spread through blood infection. If it makes sense that they were suffering from AIDS, wait. Could it be that after these 2 people were infected with AIDS, their immune systems collapsed, and then they developed lymphoma, and their condition worsened and died within a short period of time? Right. Ivan shook his head. No, I checked the autopsy report and the HIV test was negative. Then this doesn't make sense, unless there is a high concentration of radiation in the blood, direct blood, it will cause such consequences. However, if there is such a high concentration of radiation in the blood, then the owner of this blood, can it still be considered a human being? Ian's index finger tapped the table rhythmically and said slowly. In short, the following items should be added to the precautions: take good physical protection, try not to cause trauma, absolutely prohibit the intake of local food and drinks, strictly prohibit contact with any local body fluids, and it is best not to have any direct physical contact, Ivan said seriously. Listen to what you guys say. Why do I feel like this sick village is just raising poison? The Hound couldn't help complaining. Those with weak constitutions and bad luck will probably die soon after being sent there. Those who can survive and stay in the space station for several years are probably no more than monsters, if not monsters. This is not even a human being, he is simply the Poison King. Then, that Marshall, can he still survive in a place like this? Zwilligito whispered, while looking at Asano Akira cautiously. People from the Security Bureau have tortured Man's followers. They only learned about the news that Marshall was in South 16th District half a month ago. Although it is not clear whether the source of the news is reliable, it is at least worth a try. Kaylan said. That also depends on the timeliness of the information. If they obtain expired information, then we will not be taken advantage of, Hound muttered. Let's not talk about this for now, Kaylan paused. In addition to these two exploration records, the two earlier records contained more content, including the living conditions of the sick village and the daily diet of the residents. And daily life, some customs and beliefs. Speaking of this, Kaylan suddenly stopped, and the expressions of several other people also changed to varying degrees. It is mentioned in the records, that the residents of the sick village generally believe in an unnamed god. Yvonne read out the second half of the sentence in the information. Could this god be? Heretical section, Hound said one word at a time, with a very ugly expression on his face. It doesn't have to be a heretical section even if there were missionaries from a heretical sect mixed in with the miners suffering from radiation sickness. The South 16th District is completely isolated from the outside world. It is impossible for a heretical sect on the ground to exist. Those who can control the believers there. Kaylan analyzed. Furthermore, Laugo also said that the residents of sick village do not live long. Even if the heretical sect spreads among them, it will be different from the heretical sects on the ground. They definitely can't be considered the same kind. But it is still a threat to us. Yvonne continued reading this information. The residents of the sick village are very xenophobic, especially hostile to healthy people who come from the ground and do not suffer from radiation sickness, which is why for this reason, it is extremely difficult for those who go to explore the diseased villages to carry out investigation operations. Almost no locals are willing to communicate with them, and they are often spied on, followed or even attacked. If I were these people, I would also hate the people on the ground. Those mining companies are doing all the immoral things of giving birth to sons without sex. What's the difference between throwing people in a space station and leaving them in the wilderness to fend for themselves? To put it bluntly, well, those mining companies never treated them as human beings. This is simply the treatment of animals, the Hound cursed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 367. Let's not talk about this for now. The first thing we have to solve is the communication problem with the local people, Kaylan said. I think we may have to change our plan. What kind of change? Layton asked. We found a ship transporting supplies and new patients, disguised as radiation sickness patients, and sneaked into the hospital, Kaylan said. Originally, they planned to take the grease to the space station, but if they did this, the local people's attitude towards them is probably not much different from the previous batches of explorers, let alone finding Marshall. Even getting information will become extremely difficult. But, if you want to pretend to be a patient with radiation sickness, you can't wear protective clothing, and you can't carry some relatively large weapons and equipment with you. You may have to eat the same food as the locals. Doing so will not be risky. It will be too big, Yvonne said with some worry. Not everyone is pretending to be a patient with radiation sickness. The only ones pretending to be patients are me and Asano, Akira, Yvonne, and Layton. You still maintain your identity as explorers. We are divided into two groups, one in the open and one in the dark, to find out the information. We will do the work of finding people, and you will be responsible for attracting the attention of local people and providing us with support if necessary. Why is it me again? I don't like being stared at by a group of weirdos all day long. Layton said a little aggrievedly. I always feel uncomfortable. Both you and Yvonne are equipped with cybernetic prosthetics. Do you think low-level miners who can't even cure chronic radiation sickness can afford such equipment? Kaylan took a look and said bluntly. Okay, Layton responded dejectedly. Although he didn't like the feeling of being stared at, if he was asked to replace this prosthetic body with an outdated model like Bartlett's, he would definitely not do it. For him, this cyborg prosthetic body made by himself is almost equivalent to his second life. I checked the airport registration record. In exactly 1 week, the Mitsui Consortium will have a transport ship to send dozens of miners suffering from radiation sickness and a batch of supplies to the space station. With Sakurai NA's relationship, we should be able to get a ride. Good luck, Kaylan said. There is still plenty of time. I originally wanted to take advantage of these few days to deal with the contract between Qin Zhao and the Polaris hunting group, but the news from the Soma Consortium has revealed that this matter, it seems like we don't have to worry about anything anymore. What's going on? Asked the Hound. The Anderson Consortium has adjusted its industrial structure some time ago. It seems that they want to focus on the military industry and biopharmaceuticals. They have built 6 new production lines for mecha accessories. 3 of these 6 production lines have been put into production. Originally, they planned to take advantage of the popularity of the mecha competition to launch new products in time to seize the market, but as you all know, because of the man incident, the finals were postponed for a full 3 months. The size and strength of the Anderson Consortium are far beyond not as good as the F family, which caused their already very tight capital flow to suddenly break. It's called retribution, and it's very satisfying, muttered the Hound. It's mainly because the risk assessment was not done properly, and who would have thought that something like this would happen in a mecha competition? Kaylan shrugged, but this is good news for us, because they plan to. It's a pity that the Polaris hunting group is packaged and sold, but no consortium seems to have shown the desire to buy it now. Layton said, I just checked. The Anderson Consortium had put all the shares of Polaris hunting group up for sale 6 days ago, but no one bought it at all. In 6 days, the market value of Polaris hunting group has plummeted by 37%. Humph, I guess they are as anxious as ants on a hot pot now. The capital chain is broken, which is not a small matter. If the Polaris hunting group cannot be sold, the bank will come to them, and they will have to auction the mortgaged assets. By the way, Kaylan, you don't want to take over the Polaris hunting group, do you? The Hound stretched out his index finger to pick his nostrils, and then flicked a booger out with his nails. To be honest, I don't like that group very much. Guy. Although the operating conditions of the Polar Star hunting group are pretty good, the acquisition is not a loss, Kaylan said, but compared with our God hunting group, the scale of Polar Star is still a bit larger, and a rash merger will easily lead to anti-customers, and we won't be able to come up with so much cash to buy the entire Polaris hunting group for a while. Then what are you going to do? Old dog, you go and negotiate with them. We only want the weapons and equipment of the Polar Star hunting group, the exploration equipment and the ruins archives they have built over the years, plus a transfer contract from Qinzhou. As for those hunters, we don't need any different assets such as logistics, real estate, and land. I think, it shouldn't cost much. This matter is difficult. I finally understand. Although I have no part in this trip to the sick village, you obviously don't intend to leave me idle. Hound took out a cigarette and patted it. He patted Layton beside him and said, Big guy, take out the welding gun and lend it to me. I can't find the lighter. You go and give it a try. Just think of it as a way to hone your negotiation skills. Anyway, you can give in to anything. All you have to do is poach Qin Zhao over. Everything else is just an added bonus, Kaylan said with a smile. Negotiation skills, what negotiation skills do I have? If you want to talk about swearing, I'm confident that 10 people will come across from me. But if you want me to talk about this kind of thing, it's best not to have high hopes. Hound lit up his cigarette. He took a big sip and said, Sophia will borrow our people and go with you. Let the professionals handle the details. Old dog, you will be responsible for keeping the situation under control. If the other person goes too far, just scold him for doubting life. Anyway, now they are the ones asking for help. Okay, I'll bring Zwilligito with me. If we can't reach an agreement, I'll press the other person's head on the negotiating table, Hound said, and while Leighton wasn't paying attention, he put out the cigarette butt directly on his robotic arm. You old thing. I just made new paint the day before yesterday. A week later, the 6th airport in East District 11. Coincidentally, when they boarded the Aurora Consortium's transport ship to go to the Pioneer icebreaker, they were also at this airport. Today, it can be said that they revisited the old place. But this time, the treatment they enjoyed was completely different from before, because of Sakurai NA. Not only the Mitsui Foundation specially arranged a pickup vehicle, but even the captain of the transport ship was waiting at the airport. They were greeted at the entrance. This battle really gives me a lot of face, Kaylan couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the crew members standing in a row, as if waiting for a review. Of course, now you should know what a wise decision it was to agree to me joining you, right? Said Sakurai NA, who came with Kaylan and the others. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 368. Yes, 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 Kaylan responded very perfunctorily. Then, can you let me act with you this time? Sakurina asked tentatively, looking at Kaylan expectantly. No. You are really. Miss Sakurina, pay attention to your behavior. Akira Asano is right behind you. You don't want to leave any bad influence on him. Kaylan turned his head and said in a voice that only Sakurina could hear. Of course, Asano Akira must be able to hear it, but he won't have any reaction whether he heard it or not. When Kaylan said this, Sakurina, who was about to have a seizure, calmed down instantly. An imperceptible blush appeared on her cheeks. She glanced at Asano Akira, who was following behind with the corner of her eye, but the latter. Keep your head down, look at your nose with your eyes, look at your nose with your nose, look at your mouth with your mouth. Kaylan and Akira Asano are both wearing a set of pullovers made of cheap synthetic materials at the moment. In order to look more realistic, these two pullovers were bought second-hand, and many of the rips on them are still attached and have turned yellow. Of repair tape. On the outside of the pullover, there is a work vest that was also bought from the second-hand market. The shoulders, waist ribs, and edges of the vest are very badly worn. At first glance, it looks like it was worn by people who have been working in the mines all year round. On the inside of the vest, there are two hidden small pockets sewn into it, which contain a box of emergency medicine, a small piece of clay explosive, a micro lockpick, and a pocket pistol with an ammunition capacity of only 5 rounds. Except for the pile of miners' personal belongings in their backpacks that were no different from garbage, this was all the equipment he and Asano Akira carried. Of course, Asano Akira's nano alloy sword, which he never leaves, is still with him, but at this time, the outside of the scabbard is covered with dirty and old bandages, disguised as a guide stick, even though Asano Akira doesn't have any knowledge at all. There is no need for such a thing. In comparison, Leighton and Ivan's equipment is much more luxurious. They wear a light full coverage power armor. This is equipment specially sponsored by Master Yayan. It is said that the mass-produced version has not yet been launched. The two pieces of armor given to them were prototype armors whose models had not even been finalized. The cost alone was enough to be worth the cost of a fully equipped Valkyrie. As for medicines, supplies, weapons, and equipment, detection instruments and other things, there were even 3 large boxes filled with them. Leighton even brought a dozen cans of instant food. Based on previous groups of people exploring the sick village, I later came to the conclusion that this kind of can is very popular among the locals. No matter how xenophobic they are, as long as you can bring out a can, there will always be someone willing to say a few words to you. Of course, it is limited to a few sentences. Mr. Kaylan, the rest of the journey will be a little unfair to you and your companions, the captain of the transport ship said to Kaylan and Akira Asano. His name is Shuaki Mitsui, and he is a collateral member of the Mitsui family. Has been in charge of this route for 4 years, and he knows something about the situation in the sick village. It doesn't matter. If you want to get in, you still have to bear the price, Kaylan said. Leighton and Yvonne can enter the cabin where the crew members live, and Kaylan and Akira Asano, as the cargo transported by this transport ship, will be with this group of radiation-sick miners who were sent to the sick village. One group was placed in the cargo hold. There was no bed or even a place to sit. They could only survive the 2.5-day journey by relying on the cold and hard cargo box. I will arrange for someone to deliver breakfast, lunch, and dinner to the cargo hold every day. Before the captain finished speaking, Kaylan interrupted him. No, please don't. I will eat whatever the miners eat. At this time, if my identity is exposed because of some trivial things, I will eat whatever the miners eat. That would be too much of a loss. Also, don't talk to me later, just treat the two of us as goods and throw them in. Then, well, then I can only offend him. The captain bowed 90 degrees to Kaylan, and then waved to the crew member wearing protective clothing next to him, and the crew member pushed him away. Then the two of them walked towards the door of the cargo hold. Asano Akira had already taken 2 anti-radiation pills, while Kaylan had not taken anything. He had already discovered before that not only did his body gain super self-healing capabilities, but it also had a strong resistance to radiation. It was already far higher than that of ordinary people, and some radiation that was not too high in intensity could not affect his body at all. Please be careful where you step, the crew member said to the two men in a very low voice, then pushed them into the cargo hold and closed the door. It was very dark inside the cargo hold. Only a long strip of light on the top of the bulkhead was emitting dim light. What could be illuminated was only a small space at the hatch. Dozens of huge cargo boxes filled the space, and the narrow aisle in the middle could barely allow 2 people to pass side by side. Kaylan patted Asano Akira on the shoulder and walked through it with him. In the deepest part of the cargo hold, there are more than 20 miners who are about to be sent to the sick village. They are all patients with radiation sickness. Among them, some of the more serious ones cannot even sit up and can only lie on simple stretchers. An infusion pole was welded with discarded steel pipes next to the stretcher. Kaylan glanced at the medicine bags hanging on the infusion pole. They were basically saline and glucose used for rehydration. These things could only temporarily maintain the patient's vital signs. It has no therapeutic effect at all on the diseases they suffer from. Only 2 or 3 miners raised their eyes and glanced at the new Kaylan, while many more people ignored them at all. Kaylan took Asano Akira to a random corner and squatted down. The one closest to them was a skinny middle-aged woman. Her arms were exposed and covered with a thick layer of creepy growths. There were cysts the size of soybeans embedded in it. One of the cysts had ruptured, and the pus had condensed into lumps around it, exuding a faint fishy smell. In comparison, the working environment of the miners on Leviathan is relatively comfortable. There are not many strong radiation areas in Leviathan's body, and the company regularly rations anti-radiation and anti-radiation, so patients suffering from the proportion of miners suffering from radiation sickness is not high. Yui Arazaka once said that the mortality rate of the Mitsui Consortium's miners on Leviathan within 1 year was 16%, which is considered low among the various mining areas on Alpha Planet. In some mining areas with strong radiation, even if equipped with standard protective clothing, the maximum working time of each miner is difficult to exceed 3 months. In such places, miners are really used as consumables. Money is exchanged for human life is exchanged for minerals, and minerals are exchanged for money. This is what those mining companies have been doing. P.S. Thanks to Lost Zhuang for the 5,000 starting coins, and thanks to book friend 20210617145313850 for the 100 starting coins. Alien Relic Hunter author, and Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 370. Kaylan turned his head and glanced at the cargo box behind him. Although there was no label on the cargo box, he had already read the cargo list before boarding the transport ship. More than 90% of the goods in these boxes are all protein blocks made from cockroaches. In addition, there are several old water circulation treatment equipment and a batch of drugs. This batch of drugs is also not used to treat radiation sickness. Most of them are nutritional supplements with extremely low production costs. They are used to replace some of the vitamins and minerals that cannot be obtained from protein blocks, and the rest are all painkillers and sedatives. These goods were raised by several different mining companies, as were the miners suffering from radiation sickness. They came from 11 mining companies under 5 consortiums, and these mining companies all belong to the Alpha Star Mineral Development Alliance. The Alpha Star Mineral Development Alliance was established 30 years ago. Its main purpose is to solve the aftermath of these miners suffering from radiation sickness. Every once in a while, the companies in the alliance will collect the sick miners. Together with these supplies and materials, they were sent to the sick village. This time, it happened that the Mitsui Consortium was responsible for transporting people and materials. The Alpha Star Mineral Development Alliance announced that out of humanitarian spirit, they established a complete sanatorium on the South 16th District Space Station, where every unfortunately sick miner can be properly treated. Therefore, they even filmed a so-called documentary to depict the comfortable life of these sick miners in a nursing home. Of course, this documentary was not shot on the space station at all, and those so-called sick miners, they are just actors hired by the Development Alliance. As for what the real sick village looks like, no one knows at all. Even the captain of the transport ship will only stay briefly in the loading area of the space station and never go deep into it. All exploration records have been sealed and are inaccessible to those with insufficient authority. As for the media, they have all been issued a gag order and are strictly prohibited from reporting any news related to the South 16th District. The energy of the Mineral Development Alliance alone cannot achieve this level. This only shows that ARC officials have acquiesced in this matter. After all, in a high radiation mining area, it is difficult for a fully automatic mining robot worth millions of credits to have a working life of more than 200 hours. Manufacturing such a robot requires a large amount of precious resources, but the minerals mined during its short working life are simply not worth its own wear and depreciation rate. A miner who only needs to pay a few thousand credits per month can work for at least 2 to 3 months before he suffers from physical problems. Feeding a miner does not require the consumption of energy crystals, nor does it require silicon crystal chips and precision circuit boards that are easily scrapped in a high radiation environment. It only requires protein blocks and water, plus a bed for people to lie down and sleep on. Is enough. For the ruling class of ARC, population is also a resource, and it is also a very cost-effective resource. From the perspective of a mining company, not to mention efficiency, the cost of manual mining is obviously much lower than using fully automatic equipment. Moreover, they will never worry about not recruiting enough miners. With thousands of credits, although the monthly salary is not very high, it is still a great temptation for people at the bottom of society. The salary levels in factories and service industries on ARC are not even as high as those of miners. Those who have no background and capital, and know for people with certain abilities or special skills, becoming a miner may be the fastest way to make money. Anyway, we have protective clothing and anti-radiation drugs. If we only work for a month or two and then leave, we should not be so unlucky that we will get radiation sickness. Many people have this idea when filling out the application form. Judging from the data provided by the Mitsui Foundation, the ratio of lucky people to unlucky people is about 3 to 1. In other words, only 1 person in every 4 people will suffer from radiation sickness, compared to the number of ruin hunters. Mortality rate: miners are already considered a low-risk occupation. Few people who sign up to mine think about what the outcome will be like if they become one of the unlucky quarters. The current standard treatment method for radiation sickness on ARC costs 90,000 credits for 1 course of treatment, which is almost equivalent to 3 years of their salary. And none of these miners can work in the mine for 3 years. Kaylan suddenly remembered a sentence: the probability is 0 if it is not his turn, but if it is his turn, it is 100%. And the people in this cargo hold, except for the 2 of them, are all poor people with a 100% chance. A slight vibration came from around the cabin, and Kaylan knew that the transport ship had left the port at this time and began to sail towards the sick village floating in low Earth orbit. The unusual movement of the transport ship caused a brief commotion among the miners, but it quickly subsided. Radiation sickness has drained their physical energy. For these people, even talking is a very strenuous task, let alone move his position. Many people were lying on the ground in a mess, their skinny bodies shaking with the ground of the cargo hold. One miner began to vomit, but he had no strength to get up from the ground. The vomit that came out of his throat poured back into his trachea, his body began to twitch, his feet kicked slightly, and his face gradually began to it turned blue and purple, and his 2 eyes protruded from their sockets, as if they were about to roll out. After about 2 or 3 minutes, he stopped struggling, and the hands holding his throat loosened and fell to his body. Both sides. His chest stopped rising and his pupils began to dilate. He was dead. The miners who were sitting looked at him with indifferent and dull expressions on their faces. Within 2 or 3 minutes, no one was willing to step forward to help him. They seemed to be numb to death, or maybe, I don't want to waste my energy on strangers at all. Kaylan did not move. This was not because he was as cold-blooded as the other miners, but because he noticed that 2 miners had a familiar pattern tattooed on their bodies. The last time Kaylan saw this pattern, it was still there. A missionary who is obsessed with himself. These 2 miners are members of a heretical sect. Moreover, their status in the sect may not be ordinary. As far as Kaylan knew, ordinary believers of the heretical sect would not have such emblems tattooed on their bodies. At least he did not have such emblems on the bodies of the people in the Arezaka Consortium or the exiles who entered the bottomless sinkhole. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 371. Judging from the information currently available, it seems that only missionaries and priests in heretical sects will tattoo this kind of emblem on their bodies, and without exception, they all have some kind of danger in their bodies. Creature. Could it be that there is something hidden inside these 2 miners? However, every miner who is sent to the sick village should have been examined. Even if the examination is not as detailed as the self-paid physical examination, there should be no shortage of items such as blood tests and radioactive scans. If there was something parasitic in their bodies, it should have been discovered long ago. No. Since the heretic sect can let these 2 people sneak into the miners, it is not difficult to hide from the routine inspections. Those staff responsible for the inspections are all employees of the Mine Development Alliance, both they are neither soldiers nor agents of the Security Bureau. If you want to bribe them, you don't even have to pay a high price. But the question is, why did the heretical sect send these 2 people to the sick village? Kaylan looked at the 2 people with the corner of his eyes. Their emblem, one was tattooed on the ankle, mostly covered by the trouser legs, and the other was on the neck, mixed with a lot of messy tattoos. It's just that compared to the other tattoos, this emblem consisting of skulls, tentacles, and water drops is obviously much more detailed, which is why Kaylan noticed it at a glance. What is their purpose? You can't go to a sick village to preach, right? This is an isolated place. Even if the heretical sect occupied the entire sick village, it would be meaningless. It would just be to activate the main gun of the Ark again. Without an empty ship, no one can leave here. A space station like a prison. There is no land, no resources, and no wealth left over from the Alpha civilization. The only thing of some value may be the miners who are seriously ill. No, to be precise, even these people have no value. They are unable to provide funds, intelligence, and technology to heretical sects like the Arasaka Consortium, and their weak constitution is difficult to become an ideal container for parasitic monsters. Even if a very small number of miners mutate into that kind of radiation monster, compared to the seeds of corrosion, they are nothing more than cannon fodder. In K. Ian's view, it is much wiser to go to an exile camp in the wilderness to develop believers than to go to such an aerial prison filled with dying people. Unless there is something they want. In order not to attract the attention of these two missionaries, Keilan and Asano Akira did not do anything extraordinary from beginning to end. Almost 10 minutes after the man who choked to death on his own vomit died, two crew members wearing protective suits and carrying U-shaped long-handled anti-riot steel forks and electric shock batons walked into the cargo hold. Obviously, in there should be infrared cameras installed somewhere that the miners can't see to monitor them, otherwise the crew wouldn't have arrived so quickly. The two crew members came closer and first looked around at the miners. After confirming that there were no other abnormalities, the one holding the riot-proof steel fork took a step forward and stabbed the corpse on the ground with the fork in his hand. "He is dead." The cause of death was suffocation, the man said to his companions, and the voice coming out from under the protective clothing sounded particularly dull. It's really troublesome." Another person squatted down, shined a flashlight on the deceased's face, and then pulled up the deceased's arm, including Keilan and Asano Akira. Everyone in the cargo hold, every miner wears a rubber band on their wrist. This thing contains a chip, and its function is similar to the wristbands used in hospitals to mark patients' identification information. He took out a scanner gun and glanced at the rubber ring. The scanner gun made a soft beep sound, and the screen at the handle lit up slightly with fluorescence. "It's from Talaman Mining Co., Limited." He read while looking at the information on the screen. "Do you want to report it?" the crew member holding the steel fork asked. "Forget it, just leave it here. When the ship arrives at the station, just drag the bodies off, no one cares about their lives anyway. Once the cargo is delivered to the space station, our mission will be completed," the man holding the scanner gun, the crew member said impatiently. "That's right," the other person nodded. "Even if we reported it, the people above would probably be too lazy to reply. That is to say, if we have this time, we might as well watch a few short movies." "Movies? We have flown to this height, can you still connect to the ARC's network?" "Humph, I knew I was going to go on this mission a long time ago, so I downloaded the resources to my pad in advance. This time there are several films starring amateurs. I took a few glances in advance. The quality is quite good, and they are all infantry." "What a good thing. Send it to me later." The voices of the two crew members gradually faded away, and with the sound of the electric door closing, silence returned to the cargo hold again. In the air, a stench mixed with the sour smell of vomit gradually filled the air. After the miner died, the sphincter of the excretory organ lost its function, and the filth accumulated in the bladder and rectum began to be discharged from the body. There was flow on the floor of the cargo bay. Radiation sickness severely affected his gastrointestinal system. There was almost no formed feces in the excrement. It was all pulpy dark green liquid, mixed with a lot of pus and blood and necrotic tissue that fell off the inner wall of the intestine, even if he did not choke to death because the vomit blocked his trachea. Judging from the severity of his condition, he probably did not have much time to live. Perhaps it would be a relief to die like this, Keilan thought silently in his heart. A few hours later, the electric door opened again, and two crew members pushed a cart in and stopped about 10 meters away from the miners. "It's time to eat. Everyone is lined up. No fighting is allowed. Otherwise, don't blame me for taking action." A crew member knocked on the cargo box next to him with the electric shock baton in his hand. Under the urging of the dong-dong sound, the miners jumped from the ground. He climbed up and formed a thin line in front of the cart without saying a word. The body of the dead miner was lying in the middle of the team, but no one took action to pull the body aside. They just stepped over the body numbly and walked forward, stepping on the filth on the ground. You, and you, the three of you, bring a meal to the people over there who can't get up. The crew member in front of the trolley casually named 3 people, and then opened the side door of the trolley. The food distributed is a nutritious meal in the form of batter in plastic bags. This food is originally in powder form and can be eaten directly after being brewed with water. Even patients with tumors in their throats who cannot swallow can eat it. But this is limited to a few meals on the transport ship. After arriving in the sick village, the black, palm-sized protein blocks will become the only food they can choose for the rest of their lives. P.S. Thanks to the Templar Knight for showing the light blade for the 5,000 starting coins. To book friend 201801071658209888 for the 310 starting coins. To Kyuyi Kuku and book friend 201805092221287882 for the 100 starting coins. PPS explanation on why it takes 2.5 days to fly to low Earth orbit. If it flies straight like a rocket, the miners on the transport ship will not be able to withstand the huge G-force. The route adopted in this article is similar to that of a winding mountain road, gradually increasing the altitude while continuously flying around Alpha Star, while adjusting the relative orientation between the transport ship and the space station, as for the first cosmic speed and the second cosmic speed problem. Since the airships in the setting are all equipped with the anti-gravity device of the Alpha civilization, we will not discuss it. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 372. You wait here, I'll get the food, K-Lan said to Asano Akira, then stood up and walked over, reaching the end of the line. The speed of distributing food was not slow. In less than 2 minutes, K-Lan was already in line. 2 pieces of food, he gestured to Akira Asano, who was sitting over there with his eyes, and said to the crew. After seeing K-Lan, the crew member's expression suddenly changed slightly, and then he silently took out 2 bags of food from the inside of the trolley and handed them over. After taking the food, K-Lan returned to Asano Akira, but as soon as he opened the bag, he discovered a problem. The captain took it upon himself to replace their food with something else. The other miners eat a synthetic nutritious meal similar to batter. It tastes like a semi-finished product after simply mixing flour and water. The flavoring is limited to a few grains of salt, and you may not even be able to taste the saltiness. Out. But although the contents in K-Lan and Asano Akira's bags looked similar to the nutritious meals eaten by other people, they were actually white porridge made from polished rice. K-Lan could even use his tongue to identify the ingredients. Among the ingredients, poultry meat torn into thin strands, delicious scallops, and bird's nest melted into a paste. This bag of porridge is probably several levels higher than the standard meals for the crew. K-Lan sighed helplessly in his heart. Although the captain also had good intentions, the risk of doing so was really high. If the 2 people from the heretical sect noticed, K-Lan and Asano Akira's, your identity will be revealed in an instant. Moreover, no matter how delicious this bag of porridge is, K-Lan can't bring up his appetite at this time. In such a cabin filled with all kinds of disgusting smells, no matter how amazing the food is, it will probably be obscured. A layer of shadow. What's more, the sticky texture of the chicken bird's nest porridge reminded him of the excrement flowing on the ground. This made K-Lan feel nauseated. He didn't have a strong enough heart to swallow it. No more porridge in the bag. And in order not to leave any traces, he had to eat them all. Fortunately, the hunting dog did not participate in this operation. Judging from the sensitivity of his sense of smell, he would probably have collapsed before reaching the destination. After distributing the food, the 2 crew members left. The whole process was relatively natural. Except for the slight change in facial expressions when they looked at K-Lan just now, they didn't even look at them. This is still considered a good thing. Pretty good. Due to the emergence of the heretic sect, Ian's purpose of this trip was not only to find someone, but also added an additional task. After all, he and the heretical sect were already in a never-ending situation. If given a chance, Lan would I'm happy to add a little trouble to them. Although he did not bring the kind of stone cone that can restrain the corrosion seeds, Asano Akira's war blade itself has been melted with many stalagmite fragments. Even if the two people have parasites of corrosion seeds in their bodies, Asano Akira would be better in 1 against 2. Even under such circumstances, they can be easily killed instantly. Holding back the nausea and discomfort in his stomach, Lan finished eating the bird's nest porridge in the plastic bag, then rolled up the plastic bag and stuffed it into his trouser pocket. 2.5 days, neither long nor short. When the transport ship finally docked at the loading area of the space station, 3 more miners' bodies were added to the sealed cargo hold. These 3 people did not die from accidents like the first person before. They simply died because their illness was too severe and their bodies could no longer support them. The reason why people suffering from severe radiation sickness in those documentaries can survive for several months is purely because of various medical methods that are hanging on to the patient's life: drugs, blood transfusions, nutrients, artificial organs, and even stem cell transplants. Although it is difficult to bring the patient back from the brink of death, it is not a problem to keep the brain alive for a while. Without these means and simply supplementing some glucose and electrolytes through intravenous drips, it would not take more than 15 days for a person with severe radiation to develop symptoms of nausea and vomiting until death. When the 3 people died, the muscles and skin in the abdominal cavity had begun to dissolve, and pus and blood mixed with the dirt in the digestive tract dripped out of the dissolved openings. These things themselves were high-intensity radioactive sources. Although Ian's body is immune to a certain degree of radiation, he can still feel subtle stings on his skin exposed to the air. As for the crew members, they were even less willing to come to the cargo hold. Even if they found someone dead, they had no intention of collecting the body. They just came over and sprinkled some disinfectant and left. Fortunately, the temperature in the cargo hold was always maintained at about 10 degrees Celsius, so the body did not rot. With a harsh click sound, the door outside the cargo hold slowly rose up. The first thing that entered Ian's field of vision was a confined space about 50 meters wide and more than 200 meters deep. Here is the unloading area of the sick village, and the airtight valve at the entrance and exit of the unloading area may be the only facility that the Mineral Mining Alliance has spent money to maintain in recent years. The transport ship of the Mitsui Consortium was hovering sideways on the side of the space station. The cargo hold was directly docked with the loading area of the space station. Several crew members held riot-proof steel forks and drove the miners in the cargo hold off the ship as if they were driving animals. Lan noticed that at the edge of the unloading area, a group of people wearing tattered cloaks gathered. Most of them were stooped, and their bodies exposed outside the cloaks were covered with shocking proliferative tissue, and the most special one among them was the man lying on all fours on the ground had his cloak stretched high on his back, as if there was a child riding on him. But from the corner of the cloak that was held up, you can see that there is a huge sarcoma growing on this man's back. This sarcoma is covered with thick blood vessels. These blood vessels are connected to the skinny body below, and it has obviously become an inseparable part of him. With this level of alienation symptoms, even if the giant sarcoma is removed with surgery, the person will probably die immediately. It is impossible to tell whether it is a tumor growing on the person or a person growing on the tumor. These are the residents of the sick village. They kept a distance of about 200 meters from the transport ship and stared coldly at Lan and the other newcomers who were driven off by the crew. Although he has not had formal contact with these locals, the first impression he made after seeing them in person made Lan feel a wave of resistance from physical instinct. He always felt that these residents could no longer be regarded as human beings, even though they still retain their human appearance. This place is far more uncomfortable than what was described in those records. Lan thought to himself. They glanced at the miners around them. These people seemed not to notice the danger. They were confused. There was a hint of curiosity in his eyes, looking at the surrounding environment and at the same time looking at the locals who were watching them. The eyes of these locals look weird, as if they are sizing up prey. Kaylan approached Asano Akira and said in a voice that only the other party could hear. "I don't feel murderous intent," Asano Akira said calmly. "Of course there is no murderous intent. The way these people look at the miners is not the kind of I'm going to kill you kind of eyes, but the kind of eyes that study which part of the creature's body the meat is more delicious. I think a conflict may break out, so be prepared," Kaylan continued. "As long as I'm here, no one can hurt you," Asano Akira said, a line that has appeared in many novels and film and television works, but Kaylan also understood that he was definitely not showing off when he said this. Even in the unloading area, each of the locals has the strength of the radiation monster in East 9th District. If Asano Akira wants to kill them all, he will not waste too much time. This guy is a monster that is difficult to explain using common sense. Speaking of this, Kaylan couldn't help but think of the purpose of their trip, the guy named Marshall. According to Asano Akira, when this person was in the secret experimental force, his ability was among the best among all experimental subjects. And now that people like Akira Asano are so perverted, how strong would this Marshall be if his ability hadn't backfired on him? It's hard for Kaylan to imagine. No way, there really is someone who can fly with a sword, right? Before setting off, Kaylan asked Asano Akira this question, but Asano Akira himself didn't know Marshall's strength. To be precise, except for himself, he didn't know the specific abilities of other experimental subjects. Although the experimental subjects usually live together, the tests are all conducted in separate rooms, and the experimental subjects are strictly prohibited from fighting with each other. The reason why Asano Akira can know his crane tail is completely because his number was ranked among the last few. The numbers of experimental subjects were all ranked based on their tested abilities. This was told to them personally by the person in charge of the experiment. There were approximately 500 people participating in that experiment, but only less than 200 received numbers through the preliminary screening. Akira Asano's ranking number is No. 159, and that Marshall is number 2. At this time, the crew on the transport ship had moved the cargo boxes containing protein blocks, water recycling equipment and medicines to the unloading area. Contrary to what Kaylan had expected, the locals who were watching from a distance did not come to grab them. Even if a container accidentally tipped over during transportation and the protein blocks wrapped in plastic film were scattered all over the floor, those people remained indifferent. On the contrary, it was the miners who came here on the transport ship with Kaylan and the others. Several of them couldn't help but started to pick up the protein blocks on the ground, but soon, the steel forks in the hands of the crew members hit them. "Go away. You have already received your food quota for today," the crew member yelled and pushed a miner to the ground with a steel fork. Then he raised his foot and stepped on the protein blocks that fell out of the miner's arms. "Gotta smash." As for, anyway, these things were originally issued to them, a familiar voice came from behind. Kaylan turned his head and saw that Layton, Yvonne, and the captain had already stepped off the transport ship, standing not far away watching the unloading process. "Why bother? Your men have crushed more than a dozen pieces of egg white, so what if you let them pick up a few?" Layton continued to say to the captain, "or, there is some kind of management organization in this space station. You need to hand this batch of materials into the hands of the managers, and not let these people get their hands on it." There is no officially designated manager here. We will leave directly after unloading the cargo," the captain replied. "Then why don't you let them touch it? This is the rule of the Alliance. The unloading process must be recorded. It is not up to us." The captain pointed to a crew member who was recording the video and said, "In order to prevent corruption, the entire unloading process has to be recorded. Everything must be photographed and uploaded to the Alliance's database for filing. Before the transport ship leaves the space station, everything must be done in accordance with the rules set by the Alliance." As for what they will do with these materials after we leave, it has nothing to do with us. It's really rigid, Ivan said in a complaining tone. If this kind of video is made public, wouldn't it be very detrimental to the alliance? It won't be made public. It's all internal data. The captain lowered his voice slightly, and even if it were made public, no one would believe it. The entire unloading process took about an hour and a half. The crew on the transport ship checked the airtight valve of the docking channel one last time before returning to the transport ship. Then, the hatch was closed, the docking channel in the unloading area was closed, and there was a burst of jet engine noise. Amidst the sound, the transport ship quickly left this isolated space station. More than 24 miners, including Kaylan, Asano Akira, and the 3 corpses, were left behind. Layton and Ivan, fully armed, stood a little further away from the container, back to back, watching the locals on the periphery very vigilantly. Finally, these people came towards them. They were divided into 2 groups. Some walked towards the cargo box, while the other group surrounded the new miners. As for Layton and Ivan, they were completely ignored by them. When he was still more than 10 meters away from these people, Kaylan could already smell the unbearable odor on their bodies, but what was more disturbing than the odor were the weapons these people pulled out from under their cloaks. Their weapons were mainly irregular concrete blocks and rusty steel pipes, and several of them were holding very sharp metal pieces. The front ends of the metal pieces seemed to be stained with some long-dried blood. 36 people came over, holding crude weapons in their hands, Kaylan whispered to Asano Akira. At this time, Asano Akira had already grasped the sword disguised as a guide stick. His thumb had already opened the cloth wrapped around the handle, and the blade could be unsheathed at any time, but in the next second, Kaylan instead, she grabbed his forearm and squeezed it a little harder, signaling Asano Akira not to act rashly. Their target is not us. These locals came closer, but they did not attack the standing miners. Instead, they approached the critically ill patients who were lying on stretchers and were dying. The concrete block was lifted high and then fell, and the feeble screams suddenly stopped. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 373. What are they doing? Layton, who was standing in the distance, looked at the scene in shock and couldn't help but subconsciously take 2 steps back. The people they killed were all seriously ill patients who had only a few days to live. Perhaps it was to help them end their pain, Ivan said in a deep voice. After a while, the number of corpses on the ground increased from 3 to 8. Kaylan noticed that after killing the seriously ill people, the locals would pull out a few teeth of the deceased and put them into their pockets. The face was smashed to pieces, and some corpses even had their entire jaws pried off by steel pipes. Those people used concrete blocks to knock out the teeth on the gums one by one, and then put them in their pockets as if they had found a treasure. Why do we collect the teeth of the deceased? Is this some kind of custom in the sick village? Kaylan was very puzzled. These people who were killed were all severe patients with radiation sickness. Their corpses, it is a high-intensity radiation pollution source, and the radiation intensity of the bones and teeth on the corpse is no less than those of dangerous high-purity radioactive ores. In the old era, man-made radiation pollution accidents often occurred. Due to work negligence, some highly radioactive metal scraps or raw ores were sent to garbage treatment plants as ordinary garbage, and were regarded as treasures by scavengers. After picking it up at home, within a few days, the scavenger and his family began to experience symptoms of dizziness, nausea, vomiting and diarrhea, followed by anemia and skin ulcers. When they realized something was wrong and rushed to the hospital, with the medical technology of that era, it was impossible to save the day. The behavior of these sick village residents is almost the same as the suicidal behavior of scavengers in the old era. Kaylan really can't understand their purpose. But then I thought about it, since these people can live in the sick village for a long time, their body structure must have undergone indescribable changes. Maybe they, like me, are not afraid of this radiation? Or in other words, not only will radiation not cause harm to them, but it can also be a source of their power? Although the second guess is exaggerated, it is not unreasonable. The essence of radiation is a kind of energy, but human beings cannot use this form of energy for their own use due to their physiological structure. However, this is only for human beings. Word. For example, there are many kinds of indigenous creatures on Alpha Planet, but they prefer to stay in areas with strong radiation. For them, radiation is not a threat, but an extremely precious nutrient. The more radiation they absorb, the stronger their own strength will be. The stronger it becomes. If the human body mutated into this shape, then it would not be difficult to explain the strange behavior of these people. But if you think about it carefully, it doesn't seem right. If it was to obtain radioactive materials, why not collect the complete skeleton instead of collecting a few teeth? Is this really just a custom with no practical significance? At this time, those people had lined up the corpses, and the guy with the huge sarcoma on his back and his hands and feet slowly crawled to the line of corpses, stretched out his withered palms, and touched the head of each corpse. Caressed gently. This man seems to be the leader of this group of guys. Kaylan stood behind the other miners, silently observing all this. Compatriots, your miserable life ends here. You will no longer suffer and you will no longer feel hungry. This is the end and the starting point. Kaylan was slightly startled. What kind of show was this? Read a eulogy? His voice was as hoarse as a broken bellows, and as harsh as two rusty iron pieces rubbing against each other. But no matter how unpleasant the voice was, Kaylan could feel the piety in it. This kind of emotion is difficult to fake. A charlatan and a fanatical believer, even if they recite the same prayer, the listeners will have completely different feelings. Your flesh and blood will return to the body of the great God and become a part of his body. This is a great honor. Hearing the words great God come out of the guy's mouth, Ian's eyelids couldn't help but jump. He immediately focused on the two missionaries with emblems tattooed on their bodies. But he found that the two people were staring at the guy who was mumbling something strangely. Great God is the unique name given to the God they believe in by members of the heretical section. Obviously, this guy with the sarcoma on his back should also be a member of the heretical sect. Moreover, it seems that he should be at least a priest-type character. Is the sick village completely under the control of a heretical sect? But if that's the case, why didn't the two missionaries who infiltrated the miners identify themselves? Moreover, judging from the facial expressions of these two people, it seems that they do not understand the practices of the locals. Could it be that there are also divisions within the heretical sect? Just like Christianity in the old era, although they both believe in God, there are great differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. Not only are the hierarchies and titles of clergy completely different, but even the doctrines, concepts, and some religious rituals are also very different. Big discrepancy. In the early years of the separation of Protestantism, not only did the two sides not recognize each other, but bloody conflicts often occurred between believers. Quarrels, fights, and even vendettas were common, and many religious wars broke out between countries with different faiths. It was not until the 20th century that the conflicts between them gradually eased. Could it be that the heretical sect in this sick village and the heretical sect on Alpha Planet also have such a relationship? They all believe in the great God, but they do not regard each other as one of their own. It is precisely because of this that the two missionaries chose the same method as Kaylan and the others, hiding themselves in the among the miners. Kaylan felt that he should be very close to the correct answer. Even if he didn't get all the answers, at least he had guessed most of them correctly. The entire memorial ceremony lasted for almost 10 minutes. After saying the last eulogy, the priest with the huge sarcoma on his back raised his head with some difficulty and looked at Kaylan and the newcomers. His face is very old, with almost no fat or muscle under the skin of his cheeks. At first glance, he looks like a skinny skeleton. On the top of his bare head are scabies that can drive cryptophobic patients crazy. Two turbid scabies, the gray-yellow eyes are embedded in deeply sunken eye sockets, and the edges of the eye sockets are like dried tree bark, covered with cracked lines. He doesn't look like a human being at all, but more like a ghost. This is Ian's first impression of this priest. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 374. When you come here, you must first learn our rules, he said word by word. If anyone violates the rules set by the great god, he widened his eyes, and his cold gaze swept over each miner, he will personally punish you. To impose criminal laws personally? Another question popped up in Ian's head. As far as he knew, the heretical sect on the ground, the great god they worshipped, was an invisible and intangible existence. Except when using the holy word, more often than not, the great god is just a symbolic symbol. But in the mouth of this priest, this great god seems to be a real creature. Could this just be a metaphor? Lan couldn't help but think of a cold joke he had seen before. A certain sinner was about to be sent to the execution ground. He claimed that he was a devout believer, and only God was qualified to judge him, but the person responsible for the execution only treated him. He said, "Okay, now you can think about how you will defend your crimes in front of God after you meet him." What is similar to this cold joke is a more famous movie line, "It is God's business to forgive them, and my task is to send them to see God." The priest said that the great God would personally punish the offenders, probably to kill the people directly, right? However, the priest's next sentence instantly made Lan realize that things seemed not that simple. The priest turned around and said to those who had just killed the seriously ill patients, "Bring their flesh and blood to the great God and let them become the nourishment of the great God. This is the end of their old life, and it will also be the starting point of their new life. Bring it to the great God." Could it be that the great God they believe in is on this space station? Lan felt that his heartbeat seemed to be a little accelerated. He clenched his fists hard and glanced at Leighton and Yvonne, who were far away from the people. The equipment they carried had eavesdropping devices, so they could naturally hear this. What a priest said. Both of them seemed a little nervous. Leighton even took out the gauze assault rifle from his backpack and held it in his hand, ready for battle at any time. His actions naturally attracted the attention of the locals. The priest looked at Leighton and the two with extremely disgusted eyes and muttered something in a low voice. He said, "Those are not our compatriots," Akira Asano said in Ian's ear. Lan was not surprised by this. In the records of the previous batch of explorers, it was mentioned that the residents of the sick village were extremely xenophobic. If they entered the space station as an investigator, they would not be able to interact with the locals at all. Communicate. They have guns. Do we want to take action? Another tall man wearing a cloak and holding a steel pipe asked the priest. Lan noticed that although this man was nearly 2 meters tall, but not strong, with not much muscle at all on his body. The reason why he looks very burly is entirely due to his highly deformed frame. If you haven't seen it with your own eyes, Lan also had a hard time imagining how such a skeleton could perform actions similar to those of humans. In comparison, primate skeletons were far closer to humans than this guy. "Don't provoke them yet," the priest said. "Let them do whatever they want, but they must not be allowed close to the residence of the great god." "Yes," the deformed giant replied with great respect. "The abode of the great gods. So, does this thing really live on the space station? No wonder there are differences between this group of people and the heretical sects on the ground. Although the gods they believe in are both called great gods, they are actually not the same thing at all. Could it be that the great god these people believe in is a powerful monster? But the problem is that this space station is isolated from the world, and the indigenous creatures on Alpha Planet cannot enter it at all, even if there are monsters. That's only one possibility. It was transformed by humans. You the priest looked at Kaylan and others, follow me. Under his leadership, a dozen people, including Kaylan, Asano Akira, and the two missionaries, walked towards the exit of the unloading area. The deformed giant took out several bundles of cables twisted with copper core wires, tied the two corpses together, and carried them on his back. Several other people also carried the remaining corpses without saying a word. Followed him towards another exit. Leighton and Yvonne immediately followed. They did not choose to follow those carrying the corpses, but followed Kaylan and the others. In order to avoid unnecessary conflicts, they deliberately kept more than 50 meters away from the miners' team. Distance. The crane on the top of the unloading area made a loud crunching sound, and the huge metal hook lowered, lifting the boxes containing supplies into the air, but Kaylan had not yet seen what was being sent to these boxes. There, the priest had already led them through a low metal door and entered a narrow and dark space. Kaylan recalled the structural diagram of the space station in his mind. If the structure of the space station had not been changed since then this should be the only two places where people live. Area B. P.S. Regarding the names of religious personnel, I only found out after checking the information that priests are called Catholics and Orthodox Christians, and Protestants, which are usually called Christian clergy in China, are called pastors, and the most interesting thing is, Protestantism does not recognize the status of the Pope, that is, the Pope. It suddenly occurred to me that there were many novels in the past where priests and popes often coexisted in the same religion. Now that I think about it, it always feels weird. However, since it is a parallel world, the settings should be according to the author's instructions. Therefore, I hope you will not bully me in terms of some settings. I will try my best to make the world settings more perfect and have fewer bugs. As for some things that readers may not understand, there are generally two situations. First, this may be a foreshadowing. Second, if you cannot understand something involving memes, nouns, concepts, etc., please use Baidu. So far, I admit that the biggest bug in this book is that the description of the power of antimatter weapons does not conform to reality. In other places, I feel that there should be no problems. If you, the reader, have a different understanding, please join the group 667413621 to discuss it with me. However, if you make a point in a book review or this chapter, or start a direct rant, I may choose to delete the post and ban you. Of course, if there are grammatical errors or typos or omissions, you can mention them directly in the description of the chapter. As long as the chapter is still within the revision period, I will revise it immediately when I see it, and I will be very grateful to the brothers who help catch the bugs. VIP chapters can be modified within 7 days after they are published. If they are released for more than 7 days, they will be locked and the author will not have modification permission. P.P.S. Thanks to Musinmo for the 1,398 starting coins. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 375. According to the original design intention of the space station, Area B was originally a large hangar, specially used to park aircraft entering and leaving the space station. If the partition between Area B and the unloading area is opened, even smaller ones can transport ships can also be docked inside the space station. But now, after reconstruction, the originally empty hangar has been filled with cabins that are even smaller than a capsule hotel. After all, each bunk in the capsule hotel has a space of more than 1 meter high. Although it is easy to touch the head, it can at least allow people to sit up on the bed. And the height of each cabin here is not more than 50 centimeters, if not the entire Area B is in a state of microgravity, and even those with no skills may not be able to get into the higher level cabins. Kaylan felt that using capsule hotels to describe these cabins was not appropriate. In his opinion, these cubicles were more like refrigerators used to store corpses in hospitals. Probably to save energy, the gravity simulation device in Area B was adjusted to the lowest power level. The gravity here is only about 1/5 of that on Alpha Planet. The new miners have not adapted to the gravity here. As soon as they stepped into it, they started to float one after another because they couldn't control the power of their steps. But the residents of the sick village seemed to have expected this. The miners were dragged down by them as soon as they floated up, and they themselves reached out and grabbed the steel pipe that was close at hand. These steel pipes are not handrails specially prepared for weightless conditions, but scaffolding that has not been removed outside the capsule cabin. These scaffoldings made of welded steel pipes are almost everywhere, extending from the ground to the top wall of more than 50 meters high. Many scaffoldings are wrapped with intricate wires. The insulating rubber layer on the outside of these wires has seriously aged and even fallen off. In addition, the scaffolding itself is made of metal. I think it is easy to get an electric shock in this place, but I don't know why. The residents of the sick village seem to have no intention of repairing these circuits. Strange, why is there so much scaffolding here? Logically speaking, when rebuilding a cabin in a gravity-free environment, the necessity of scaffolding is not as obvious as on the ground. Except for a few places that need to be fixed with frame structures, in most cases, construction workers and building materials can flow to high places. When working, only a safety rope is needed. Making people hover in mid-air, it can be seen that these frames should have another purpose. Just when Kaylan was thinking this, Father had already brought them to a scaffolding set up in the corner. There were many shelves fixed between the crossbars of the scaffolding. The shelves were about 1.5 meters long and half a meter wide, covered with a tarpaulin covered in stains of unknown origin. Most of the shelves had holes punched around the edges and were covered with dirty ropes. Before he even got close, Kaylan could already smell a very strong smell. "Newcomers, this is your temporary residence," the priest said to Kaylan and the others. "Someone will bring you bedding soon, and food and drinking water will be distributed on time. If no one informs you, none of you can leave this place before you do, otherwise it will be a violation of the rules." Ian's previous problem was immediately solved. The construction team thought that building the capsule cabin was a waste of materials and time, so they simplified the second half of the project into this, a scaffolding with dozens of shelves, which is equivalent to dozens of beds. This cost-saving ability has reached its peak. Even the deceitful and black-hearted real estate developers in the old era can only bow down to this construction team. On the scaffolding in front of Kaylan and the others, 1/3 of the bunks were already occupied by people. They were covered with what could barely be called bedding, and their dirty clothes were placed on the steel pipes of the scaffolding. Most of them were curled up and sleeping soundly on the shelves. The ropes on the shelves fixed the people and the bedding to the bunks to prevent them from floating outside when they turned over in their sleep. Only a few people were awakened by the noise here, turned their heads, and looked at this group of newcomers with indifferent eyes. As long as there are unoccupied beds, you can choose whatever you want, but only in this building. If someone performs well in the future, they can live there. Father said, pointing to the capsule in the distance. Cabin. In the concept of local people, a scaffolding is equivalent to a dormitory building, and the partitions on these scaffoldings are equivalent to economy class, while those capsule cabins with slightly better conditions than scaffolding can probably be regarded as business class. Well, as for the place where people like Priest live, it should be first class. But Kaylan had no idea where the first-class cabin was and what the conditions were. After the priest told them some rules that they should abide by, he led the people away. Then, the new miners began to choose their favorite bunks. In comparison, the bunks on the upper floors are definitely cleaner than those on the lower floors, and the smell is relatively less. However, most of the bunks on the upper floors are already occupied, and the highest ones left for them are only 4 or 5 liang. Bunks on the first floor. The miners immediately started fighting for the few high-rise bunks. If the priest hadn't said that fighting was strictly prohibited, they would have all been fighting in a ball by this time. In the end, the two strongest miners squeezed out the others and occupied the last two empty beds on the 5th floor. Those who were squeezed out could only settle for the next best thing and choose the ones that were relatively clean. Of bunks on the 3rd and 4th floors, Kaylan and Asano Akira did not participate in the fight. They waited for most people to confirm their bunks before choosing two bunks on the 3rd floor and got in. The angle of these two bunks was just right. Observe the bunks of the two missionaries diagonally opposite. Due to the height difference and the obstruction of other bunks, when looking from the missionary side, most of the bunks of Kaylan and Akira Asano were covered in the blind spot of vision. With the excellent observation position, coupled with Asano Akira's terrifying hearing, every move of the two missionaries was basically under the surveillance of Kaylan and the others. At this moment, the man lying on K-Ian's upper bunk suddenly put his head down, looked at Kaylan, and asked in a low voice, "Are you all new here today?"